Hello, I'm Juan Ospina,
And I'm Santiago Posada.
and we are the coordinators of this year's CFF's Emerging Voices. Welcome to this year's edition of Emerging Voices, a space provided by the Concordia Film Festival to highlight the academic research endeavors of Concordia students. This edition of Emerging Voices centers around three main themes: film genres, film styles, and national cinemas.
With us today, we have our four winners, Marie-Michel, Cesar, Joshua, and Anastasia.
Their papers stood out from the rest as they delve into different case studies oscillating between the three main themes and their own input. However, we believe it would be better if they would explain it to you. Thank you so much. Now we can continue with Joshua.
Thank you. So the paper I wrote is a study on how genre can be influenced depending on the media it's portrayed in. So for my study, I chose three East Asian gangster genre pieces of media. The first, I compared the film Infernal Affairs from 2002 by Alan Mack and Andrew Law, and the 2013 film New World by director Park Hoon-jung, and I compared both of those to the video game Sleeping Dogs by Canadian studio United Front. And the point of my paper was to explore how a genre can be represented differently depending on the media it's explored through. So I think in the last 25 years, with the developments in the video game industry moving from more pixel-based, 8 and 16-bit graphics to full 3D polygon-based graphics, there's been a lot of room opening up to explore more heavy narrative structure in video games. So I really think that video games as an art form is kind of the newest area for creative writing to be explored in. So I'm curious kind of how a genre like the last time really this happened was moving from books to film, I think was a big thing, and how a science fiction book is very different from a science fiction film. So I wanted to see how is an East Asian gangster film different from a video game. And the thing with the East Asian gangster genre is it is very narrative focused, but it's also extremely action focused. And I felt that this was almost perfect for a video game because you would have long, prolonged sections of the game where the player is just playing, shooting people, driving around, and then you would have these long cutscenes where the more narrative aspects of the game was explored. So, in looking at it, I took both the formal and the narrative elements. So, on a more formal side, there's certain things that you can do in a movie that you just can't do in a game, like scenes of perfect darkness, for example. In a movie, you could have very nice silhouetting and shadow, but in a game, that kind of visual style would be very difficult for a player to navigate a level on, and it would become frustrating if you can't see who you're shooting at. But you could have that in a cutscene in the game. So it's kind of balancing that more formal aspect between gameplay and narrative cutscenes without the player becoming frustrated or bored. So it's a bit of a juggling act. And then all kinds of gangster film iconography. So like the cell phone, for example, very heavily used in both of those films. And the game gives the player a cell phone that, while the functionality is more limited during gameplay, you can pull out at any time and do whatever you want with. And then in the cutscenes, most missions start with a cutscene of you receiving a phone call. So there are a lot of very heavy similarities between how the genre is handled in both mediums. Another aspect is the use of characters. The character design and the stories in both are very similar. But you get, as the player in a video game, you get to really explore and you get to live the gangster's life vicariously through your avatar on screen, whereas in the film, you're just being shown what the character is doing. So I think in a very important aspect of the gangster genre is the exploration of the gangster as not a likable character. The protagonist is not a hero. So in the game, this is a bit harder to pull off because you're playing as the person, you're relating to the person directly, you want to be them. So how can the game make it very clear to you that no, the person you are playing, you're not supposed to idolize. You're supposed to realize that this is a flawed character who has problems. So the games kind of use the same ways that the film do, where at first it seems like this is an invincible, powerful character that gets everything he wants, and then slowly, over the course of the narrative structure, this is taken away from him. He is punished for what he is doing. So the same thing is present in the game, but you can't do that perfectly in the game, because the more you punish the player, the more frustrated they'll become. So really the whole paper kind of explores this give and take of, well, we want to do this to make the game as close to the, overall genre experience of the gangster without losing the gameplay element of it.
So from what I've read and understood, there's something kind of that ties up uh, these four papers, and maybe some of you want to like expand on that idea too. I feel like the concepts of like genre and societal constructions are very like intertwined. So we have on one side feminine representations on the femme fatale and the film noir, and the single mother trope on J horror. So these are both societal constructions. On the other side, we have on gangster films, you have this idea of an idolized evil person. We could call it evil, or I mean, I'll let that idea to float around. Joshua has his hand up first.
Yeah, I think in terms of female representation and also the idea of the idolized evil person, in the East Asian gangster genre, you have this weird dichotomy where a lot of the time women will be represented as sex objects or prostitutes or nothing more than something for the man to own. But kind of more unique to the East Asian gangster genre compared to a lot of like Italian gangster genre is that you will also have women empowered in like really powerful roles within the gangster hierarchy. But then at that point, they've had to commit so much crime to get to that powerful position that the powerful women that are represented are evil. And a lot of the time, the more innocent women are represented as sex objects. So it's kind of the sacrifice that has to be made in order to gain power as a woman in the genre.
So to expand on Santiago's idea of like these gaps of representation, these gaps of years, these gaps in which like there's a lot of growth. Maybe Cesar, Joshua, and Anastasia want to talk about the actual gaps in their papers. I know Cesar talks about an intergenerational gap. There's a formal gap in Joshua's paper between like cinema and video games, and there's the memory gap, if you want to call it like that, in the Mood for Love, between Wong Kar Wai's own experience in the '60s and his own experience as a person from Hong Kong during the '97 handout. So if you want to expand on that, that would be great. Who wants to go first? Joshua. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's also an interesting thing genre-wise with a time gap, and that is the films I chose to compare to my modern era video game were both modern East Asian gangster films. And I think if I were to have compared older films, like Angels with Dirty Faces, from the 30s, older gangster films, to a modern gangster video game, it would have been a completely different paper. And I think if you take a modern film, you can make it more narratively similar or comparable in a modern video game. Whereas if you had taken an older film, it would be more a video game wearing the skin of the film, but it wouldn't have the same like true narrative spirit. Like I'm thinking of the Mafia games, which follow the same kind of storyline as older Italian gangster films, but it doesn't feel like it's a piece of old Italian gangster media. It feels like it's a new thing wearing the facade of it. In terms of from a genre approach, I think it's interesting with the video game because the films have the advantage of being real. They were actually captured moments of real people in real time in East Asia, whereas the game is completely created within a virtual engine. So for things like cultural iconography, that had to be completely recreated. So I think Sleeping Dogs did a very good job of doing that and capturing the East Asian, particularly Hong Kong, because that's the setting of the game. And if you compare a lot of the locations featured in the game that you can explore in 3D space from all angles with what is shown to us in the flat images of the film Infernal Affairs, which also took place in Hong Kong, visually, the two look similar well, they look as good as it can be with the old 2008 graphics of Sleeping Dogs. I mean, they did their best to recreate environments. But I think that's something that should be commended about the video game, is that it had to create everything you see from scratch, and it did it well without making the Hong Kong of Sleeping Dogs a caricature for a Western audience compared to the actually Hong Kong produced film.
Yeah, no, definitely. I gotta agree with you. The universes we see created on screen, like the diegetic universes, they're definitely in most of the cases reflections from real things. Even in sci-fi, even if we see a spaceship that doesn't exist, it's still a reflection of something, of a vehicle that we have seen in our life, you know. So in a video game, everything is from scratch, and that's something that is admirable, and it's very interesting to see like the connections you make between both of them.
Out of curiosity, I wanted to ask Joshua, you wrote something in your paper that was really interesting, and I want to know, like, you wrote gangster genre is dependent on the geographic and ethnic origin of its source. Like, why do you think that? Like, I just think it's really interesting.
Oh well, yeah, I think I think that's true. I think it's because like the narratives that'll be in the film will be completely different, but also the style will be completely different because the way that criminal organizations and enterprises work is different depending on geographical location. So like the way that, say, the Hells Angels operate in the States is different from the way that the Italian mafia works in Sicily, and is different than the triads work in China and Hong Kong. They're all criminal enterprises, and they all have a semi-corporate militaristic structure. But what they sell is different. How they intimidate people is different. The kind of operations they perform is different. So that will, just at its most basic level, will influence the kind of stories that are told. You know, there's opportunities that arise when telling a story about smuggling that you would not have as much of an opportunity to tell in a different kind of setting. You know, a lot of North American, specifically American gangster stuff has to do with crossing the American-Mexico border and the drug trade, whereas a lot of stuff in East Asia has to do with human trafficking. And then there's just the difference in the film industry in the two places. Like just a film produced in China stylistically will be different from a film produced in America or in Hollywood. So you add those two factors together and you just have a completely different cinematic experience.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for the answer. It just stuck with me when I read your paper, and I really wanted to know what was why, like, you decided, like, why you put that in there. So thank you for that.
So yeah, and also there's something that I see kind of like between all of your papers, and it's this idea of like affection. Why do we feel affectionate to write about or to care about these characters and about these stories? So I was wondering if you wanted to expand on that, and I think that would be our last like kind of like concept we can explore due to that time limits. But yeah, I would like to like hear your opinions on that. Who wants to chip in first? Yeah, Joshua, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think with the gangster specifically, is he's designed as a flawed character, and he is trying in most cases to get a better life. He is trying to protect his loved ones. In a lot of ways, he's trying to do things that are very relatable, and things that a normal protagonist would do. The problem is, in order to achieve those goals, he's killing people and he's breaking the law and he's dirtying his soul in a more metaphorical sense. So he has to be punished for it, but it's almost a punishment that is it's bittersweet. At the same time that it's satisfactory to watch an evil character be killed or punished or locked up, it's also, we know as the audience who observed him that he had some not even redeemable qualities or admirable qualities, but there was something to him that was urging him to go forward. So we can understand the reason behind his madness, but we can't forgive it. So I think that makes the gangster character a very interesting character to follow, and especially in a video game where you are him, so you are playing him, so you don't want to see your avatar punished, and yet it has to be.
Yes, I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
without further
Thank you,
ado,
guys.
this is a goodbye.
All right. Stay safe, guys.